What's up there, Workforce? Chris here with Work To Game, and I wanted to sit down and talk about what Shadowbringers means. Is it repetitive? Is it just more of the same? The good and the bad side of that, and kind of why it might be, why it might not be, and just a little bit about where that mentality comes from, because I'm seeing it pop up in the comments as we come out of our last fan fest going into Shadowbringers. This weekend, I had some family events, and so I watched all the coverage back to back to back right before sitting down to talk about this. So I have had a ton of your feedback right there, and I did want to first of all thank Dante Peterson, saying, hey man, I appreciate this video, talking about a video we came out with a little while back about whether or not 2019 would be good for Final Fantasy 14, and saying that you just came in from WoW and you appreciate our positivity. We appreciate the amount of positivity and constructive feedback you guys put down in the comments, whether you agree with us or not. This community here at the Workforce, you guys are fantastic. Thank you for hitting that subscribe button. Thank you for hitting like on our videos, leaving comments, constructive. Doesn't matter if you agree with us or not. We really do appreciate it. So let's dive in on whether or not Shadowbringers is just going to be more of the same. Now, the first reason I'm seeing people bring up that says this is just more of the same is centered on the race changes. We now have the Viera, the bunny people, right? And they're only going to be female. And then we have the Ronzo, which are the lion guys, and they're only going to be men, right? So we have women, we have men. There's not going to be any crossover there. Now we're getting two races. In Stormblood, we didn't get any. That's supposed to be controversial, and I'm even seeing some comments on the forums and otherwise where people are saying like this is the reason they're gonna unsubscribe. You couldn't play as either of these races now, so I don't know why you're subscribed to the game if that's what you were looking for. So I'm struggling a little bit to kind of put myself in your shoes, the people that feel that way, but I'm gonna do my best and say, okay, they didn't announce the race changes the way you expected, so this is going to be why you unsubscribe. This is why the game, and it's just more of the same. Well, we've never had a race that was limited by gender. We've never had two races dropped with a, expansion like this and still get two jobs and still get a limited job. Like, from that standpoint, this is a lot of content. And that brings us on to the second thing, is the class changes. So we have a ton of class changes that we don't know about for all the existing classes, and we really don't know exactly what all that's going to look like in a new battle system. I have a lot more questions than answers when it comes to that subject, but we are getting Gunbreaker as a tank, and instead of pairing it with a healer as was expected, we're getting Dancer as a DPS. And so getting a DPS in a tank is unexpected. So people are saying it's more of the same. Well, it's not. From that standpoint, nobody could have predicted literally everything that's happened without the leaks, without things like that. Some part of your prediction would have been wrong because they're not sticking to the formula here. We got two races, but a male and a female. We got two jobs, but not two DPS or a tank and a healer as a pair. We got a DPS and a tank. We're not staying the Warriors of Light. We're going to be in the Warriors of Darkness if you care about lore. We've seen them change the recipe for the number of dungeons they release and how often they release them. We've seen them change the recipe on what raids look like and how those play out. We've seen them change this game in a lot of ways. But if you're expecting this game to change drastically, then I want to back up and ask why you think a race change or a class addition or anything would change the game in the first place. And what I mean by that is races do not change the game mechanics in any meaningful way. We don't have this action bar with, 4 or 5 different racial abilities and racial elemental resistances or anything like that that changes your mechanics within the game in a meaningful way. There just isn't one. Race, for the vast majority of this game and how it plays out, is purely cosmetic. It is purely glamour based. And so it is something to invest yourself more in the story. They gave me a choice, so I made my choice. And I like the way my character looks, and I like playing as my character. And I'm glad my character is not Brian's character or anybody else's. I'm glad it's mine. But them coming out with another race doesn't change the game. You're still playing through the same story. You're still playing the same dungeons. You're still playing as the same classes. You're still playing the same game. And so adding a character to the game, I don't understand what adding a class to the game does to expand the amount of playtime you can put in this game outside of possibly roleplay. I understand it can make it appeal to more people, and that's great, and they definitely shouldn't take races out. That would piss people off. Once I've created a character, I expect it to stay the same. I don't expect you to force me to change my name. I don't expect you to force me to change my character's gender, race, height, anything that you have given me choice over. Kind of like when you book a flight with an airline and then you get there and they've changed your seat. If you can't guarantee my seat, then just let me book a ticket and say, hey, we'll kind of be assigning your seats when you get to the airport to check in. Maybe we'll offer you selection at that time. Maybe we won't. And then I won't be upset because that's my expectation. But when you let me select something on my ticket and then I get there and it's changed, you've created a point of contention where there didn't need to be one. So should they take races out? No, they should leave every race that's in the game, but adding races is a very limited impact for the amount of dev time. If you could take that same amount of time in character modeling and all that and spend it on a new change to the battle system or something like that, it could be a lot wider sweeping than the number of players. So I'm glad they're doing it. I just don't think that single-handedly should be the reason you play this expansion or don't. All on its own, I just don't think that it's the be-all, end-all, most important thing, and it's the reason you log in is just to look at your character. No, you log in to play the battle system or craft things. You don't just log in and spin your camera around 100 times and log out and go, that was worth $15. So race changes, perfect. That's its own conversation, but I don't think that's the reason we should say the game's more of the same, because it's not. It's also not going to make the game drastically different. It's kind of a wash. So class changes. Well, they're adding classes, but it didn't change the game. Well, it can't change the game. So the game is currently balanced around 4-man, 8-man content, 24-man content, right? It's balanced around these. And those are staying the same. We're still going to have 4-man dungeons. We're still going to have 8-man trials. We're still going to have 24-man raids. Those are all exactly the same. So they can't force you to bring a gunbreaker. They can't force you to bring a dancer. They haven't added a new role, like a support role or anything like that, which means that it is possible and actually statistically likely that there will be people running dungeons on a regular basis in the next expansion where there are not gunbreakers and dancers in the party. So the content cannot change too much. It has to be content that's beatable by the existing classes within the game. So it can't change that much, right? They can iterate on it and they can try to come up with a boss fight that you haven't quite seen before, but it has to be doable by ranged DPS dealers that move the amount that they currently move, and they stand at the distances they currently stand, and healers that heal with the current methods of healing, and melee DPS that have the ability to stand close to the boss but not die, and tanks that have the ability to hold the hate and mitigate the damage. And so they can't change it too much. The core foundation of the game is fixed. So not subscribing because the game didn't drastically change, I don't know why the live letter was where you expected that. The game cannot change that much by adding classes. It can shift, but the only way a game could drastically change would be if they started saying, okay, we're going to add in Dancer as a DPS, and we're going to remove Black Mage as a DPS, because now you have the ability to design a dungeon that no longer has to work for Black Mages. It doesn't. Because every dungeon design is constrained by the number of classes currently in the game, and you can change the way those classes work a little bit, but at their core, those classes stay largely the same, and so you can't drastically change it without removing classes. And I don't think they should remove classes. I think that's its own set of problems and has way more holes in it. But what I am trying to say is, if you keep leaving the existing players in the game, playing the classes they've been playing, changing it is still bound by not kicking those players out. And so adding classes to the game only adds so much replayability. It adds a different viewpoint, right? You're seeing the same fight, but you're standing at a different distance. You're casting different animations. Your pacing of your combat, you're pressing keys in a different order and at a different frequency. That is all it changes. And I like playing a new class. I think that change in perspective is a lot of variety. But it's still the same boss fight. It's still the same number of boss fights, roughly, as previous experiences. It still relies on you interacting with the same other classes. you're still fighting over the same gearing system. You're still stuck with the same weekly lockouts. You're still grinding the same tomes. You're still, sitting in the same house, interacting with the same market board. Changing your class only does so much to change the game. So when people say, I really expected this final FanFest to be the one where they changed the game, that was an unrealistic expectation going in. There was no way that you were going to see them say, and now it's a turn-based one-on-one fighting game with a mystery component and Candy Crush in the load screens. Like that was never going to happen. So the reason we subscribe to MMOs and the reason we're willing to pay for MMOs 6 months at a time and at the very same time say, I would never pre-order a game, is because MMOs are incredibly consistent. The reason people are bored with WoW is because they feel it's more of the same, and that's because it is. And that is both its strength and its weakness. Final Fantasy is, at its very foundation, the same Final Fantasy that came out with 2.0, right? You still have battle classes that form in the same size parties to take on roughly the same amount of content per serving, and you still have content that releases over patches, centered on a heavy amount of story that takes them into single-player 4, 8, and 24-man content, where they will receive gear that allows them to become stronger, to progress to the next round of content. Their gear catch-up mechanics will be given through tomes. We will cap the amount of the top tome to keep the top players from getting too far ahead of the bottom players. Any extra things you have, you will sell on a market board through retainers. None of these things have changed. The way you get loot has not changed. The way you manage your inventory has not changed. The way you adjust your UI has not changed. The core game foundation, right? Your slab, your plumbing, your electrical, the very things that come up from the ground and make this game have not changed. Now the finishes have changed. We've polished a lot of things off. We've made things easier. We've made things simpler. We've made catch-up mechanics. We've got better quest design, in my opinion. We've got better storytelling. We've got better cutscenes. We have classes that now play differently. So if one of them wasn't quite the perspective you enjoyed, maybe I like standing up close, but it doesn't fight at the pace that I like. Well, great. There's been new melee classes added to the game. I wish that I had a class that kind of could change perspectives, jump in and out. Well, Red Mage was added just for you, but the fight didn't change, and the content didn't change. You're still leveling through the same methods. We've even seen them iterate on the very systems that help you do this. You had a chocobo that helped you level out in the world, then you had a squadron that you could take on little dungeon missions and things like that, and now you're going to have a trust system that allows you to kind of do certain things as a single player. That is not a foundational change. That is an iteration on previous systems we've already seen. So if your complaint is that the game is not changing, I will say that while your complaint is founded in that, yes, the game is not drastically changing, it is an iterative process, as is any other major MMO, I don't think it's a reason for a complaint. I actually think it's the strength of this game. I think that we have a good game and we have a player base that wants to play it. So if you suddenly do change it, right? If we suddenly demand support classes for every party, we jump to 5-man content and you have to bring a support role. Well, the game doesn't have anybody in it that demands to play a support role as their main. Because if it did, they wouldn't play this game because they want to play a support main. And so you're relying on the number of players in the game who are willing to play a support main but are currently satisfied not playing a support main, switching over to not tie us up in endless queue times. You're assuming that players who play in a 4-man group and none of them want to switch to support aren't going to be frustrated that they now have to bring in this random 5th. You're assuming a lot of things with this drastic change, and it's an enormous risk, and it's unnecessary. You have a good game that people continue to subscribe to. Iterate, don't tear down and totally rebuild. 1.0 had so many critical issues with it that it became 2.0. It was a total restructure. But the reason we tell the story of 2.0 as this great success is because it stands out as the exception, not the rule. Most games that tear down like that, the second one doesn't succeed. It just doesn't. If the first one wasn't that good, that's it. People move on with their lives. You should honestly rebrand under another name. So I really don't know why people are expecting it to change this much. When people ask, is Shadowbringers more of the same? I would say yes. Absolutely. It's going to be more story with more dungeons and more loot and more killing stuff and more making gil and more cool glamour and more cool pets and more cool mounts and more things to do out in the world like jump puzzles and fates, and there's probably going to be a relic grind, and there's going to be stuff for crafters and gatherers to do, and there's going to be a series of alternate PvE things. There's going to be some mini games, possibly stuff added to the golden saucer. We're going to see patch cycles that mimic almost the previous stuff, so we can kind of predict when the relic will be added. We can predict when deep dungeon will be added. We can predict when the raids will be added. These are all predictable things because the game is more of the same. But it's the game you're already subscribed to because you like it. So that's a good thing. It's the reason I trust that I will like Shadowbringers, is because I already liked a lot of things about Stormblood. Do I think it could have been better? Absolutely. But I also liked a lot of things about Heavensward. Could it have been better? Absolutely. But they were great. And so I'm hoping that, I've had a lot of fun in Heavensward. Heavensward was the expansion I think I've enjoyed the most, but I've enjoyed Stormblood, and I think that there's a lot of potential here for Shadowbringers to be something I'll enjoy even more. But yes, at its foundation, it will be largely the same. So I just wanted to kind of address some of where people are saying, oh, they're disconnected and they're not listening, because in all honesty, they're giving you what they've always given you. They've always been a company that was very good at making a JRPG style MMO with four, classes built around melee DPS, range DPS, tanks, and healers that go out in the world and explore this story through beauty and animations and a very choreographed, fluid style of combat that feels good, and the gearing has always been fairly simple, and it's just, that's been what Final Fantasy is, and it's what I expect Shadowbringers to be, hopefully with its own unique viewpoint or take on that, but not a drastic and complete overhaul. This is not going to be this totally different game that you won't even recognize Stormblood. You say, man, I loved Stormblood, and I don't even know how to play Shadowbringers. That's not going to happen. You're going to level 10 more times, and then you're going to do dungeons to a weekly cap. You're going to do trials and raids when they come out. You're going to grind through story. Things will be locked behind it. You're going to be able to unlock new glamours you've never seen before, get pets and mounts, and you're going to have side content released at a steady schedule that make up things that are both things you haven't seen before but are probably iterations on previous designs, and things that are direct repeats where they have worked well in the past. That's looking at examples like the different relic grinds. They're iterations on each other, but at the end of the day, they're all a relic grind. They're all an alternate gearing progression. Deep Dungeon. I think Heaven on High feels drastically different than Palace of the Dead, but you can see the foundation. I think they learn from their mistakes and they try new things, but all within the constructs of the existing game. And they can't change it too much, because the thing about an MMO is that it is a continuation on itself. And so you cannot delete people's existing inventories. You cannot delete people's existing characters, their classes, their experience gains, their achievements. That is just not MMO etiquette. It's one of the things that people really frustrated from Destiny 1 to Destiny 2 is, I want to take my progression with me. That's part of the appeal. I took 5 years off WoW, logged back in, was exactly where I left off. That's the appeal. That's that draw, that everything I've earned is mine to keep forever and ever and ever. And so because of that, you can never design a system where it literally breaks the old stuff. Can it work differently? Sure. Have classes changed in their rotations? Yes. Do we have things that we didn't used to have? Yes. But what they haven't done is make it to where current classes literally can't even function in old dungeons. Where current, mounts literally can't work in old zones. Can they not fly? Yes, because the zones weren't designed for flight. But if they can run on the ground in the new zones, they can run on the ground in the old zones. If you could gather in the new zones, you can gather in the old zones. The core mechanic here has not changed, and that is a plus, not a minus. And it does not mean that the game cannot get better. It does not mean that the game cannot get worse. It just helps give us a foundation and a starting point on what Final Fantasy is and where it's headed from here. Left or right, only so much. My name's Chris with Work To Game. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Definitely let me know in the comments below what you think. I'm sure many of you disagree with me. Hopefully a few of you agree with me. Start a positive conversation down there. I'd love to interact with you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.
We really appreciate you watching. We really, really, really do. Really appreciate you watching. We really, really do. A 30-second end screen is so long. I don't know how to fill all this time.